dancing, loud music, and rebellious teenagers. The 2011 remake of a 1984 classic is on the schedule for today. Footloose returns after a 27-year hiatus. Should we welcome it back? Is it worth seeing? Find out on this week's Movieology. After a tragic accident kills 5 high school seniors, the town of Beaumont, Georgia decides to clamp down on the behavior and activities of its adolescents. Declaring loud rock and roll and dancing to be forbidden, the town becomes a battleground between stern, disapproving adults and typical rebellious teenagers. When newcomer Ren McCormick shows up in town, he makes it his personal mission to change the town's laws. A coming-of-age cult favorite originally made in 1984, this remake of Footloose looks to retell the familiar story for a new generation. Starring Kenny Wormold as Ren and Juliana Hough as Ariel Moore, Footloose 2011 attempts to recapture and rekindle some of the magic that made the first movie so popular. This episode of Movieology is brought to you by American Vision. Hi everyone, I'm Eric Rauch. Joe's out of the office this week and he made the tactical error of leaving me in charge. Before disappearing though, he informed me that my task would be to review Footloose. I have to tell you, I wasn't exactly thrilled with this assignment. It was hardly on my must-see movies list, and it certainly wasn't a film that I figured would be rich with worldview material. And now, having seen the film with my own eyes and ears, I can assure you that my initial reservations were indeed correct. Footloose is by no means a cerebral film. In fact, if you've seen the original, or even know someone who has, you already know what the story is. Not much has changed from 1984 to 2011. In truth, this lack of change is probably the weakest element in the film. I found it a bit difficult to understand why a remake was even necessary in the first place. Having seen the first version several times during my own high school days, I thought the movie was okay, but nothing great. However, I gave the new film the benefit of the doubt and thought it would be a different take on a familiar story. But director Craig Brewer's nearly scene-for-scene redo is not what you would call imaginative nor creative. I would even go so far as to call it a slavish remake, in that Brewer seems unwilling to rethink the story in any significant way. In fact, only 3 differences from the first film are even discernible. But it is these 3 differences that end up making the remake a much better film than the original one, at least from a storytelling perspective. The 3 differences are, first, moving the town of Beaumont from the Midwest to the South; second, the death rather than the divorce of Ren's mother; and third, and most importantly, the way in which the new film begins. We will look more closely at these 3 differences for the remainder of this review. Moving the setting of the fictitious town of Beaumont from the Midwest to the southern state of Georgia, while not an earth-shaking difference, effectively heightens the city boy in a country setting that puts Footloose in the culture class genre. In the polarized political climate of America in 2011, moving Ren from Boston to small-town Georgia, that is, from a blue state to a red state, gives a built-in tension long before he makes his first dance move. For me, though, the movie is much more personal, because parts of the new movie were shot a few miles from my house. It might seem corny, but seeing familiar landmarks become key locations in a feature film made me connect with the film in an entirely unexpected way. Even though I knew going into the theater that I would be seeing places that I drive by every day up on the big screen, it had the surprising effect of drawing me into the film. It is one thing to see places that you have visited, or to see places in person after seeing them in a film, but seeing locations that you are intimately familiar with and that you have a personal history with in an entirely new context is both strange and exciting. I became so accustomed to movies being set in neutral locations that when I saw my town up on the screen, it was at once unsettling and comforting. In reality, I suppose this is sort of an admission on my part, full disclosure to let you know that I'm probably biased to the new locations of this film. The second difference is the death of Ren's mother. In the first film, Ren and his mother moved to Beaumont because of her divorce, but in the new version, Ren is without a family because his mother has recently died of leukemia and his father has long been absent. Ren comes to Beaumont to live with his uncle Wes, who is his mother's brother. While not much is made of the death of his mother throughout the film, it comes into play powerfully in the final town council meeting. The 2011 Wren knows something of pain and loss that makes him able to talk authoritatively about losing a loved one. Reverend Shaw Moore, who's played by Dennis Quaid, is one of the major influences in the town and fully in favor of the music and dancing ban. At the town meeting, Reverend Moore is quick to remind the council of the 5 students they lost 3 years earlier, his own son being one of them. But Wren quickly disarms his argument by reminding him that he too has suffered a great loss. This plot device is subtle and not overplayed, but it is very effective during this pivotal scene. Without saying as much, Wren makes the point that grieving isn't a simple 3-step process and doesn't have to mean a lifetime of melancholy seriousness. The final difference, though, is by far the most major one. Instead of merely talking about the car crash that killed 5 of Beaumont High's most popular students, as the 1984 Footloose does, Brewer chooses to open his film by showing it. The stark contrast of the crash, immediately followed by the emotional town council meeting where the leaders vote to outlaw loud music and dancing, gives dynamic context to the town's decision. This context is conspicuously absent in the original film. Rather than viewing the decision as being motivated by the town's desire to make their children miserable, Brewer shows the humanity of the decision and the natural reaction of parents to want to protect and shelter their children. Brewer effectively creates tension at the outset of his film by giving us the town side of the story, misguided though it may be, before we are asked to feel sorry for the dancing repressed kids. And speaking of the kids, Brewer's decision to show the town side of the story from the beginning has the effect of making the kids in the town look like whining brats. Perhaps it has more to do with my age and my own position as a father and not as a teenager, but the kids in the town are portrayed as every bit of being worthy of the ban inflicted by the town. Brewer turns up the high school raunchiness and doesn't miss a chance to show every bump and grind, and that every thought on a young teenager's mind is all sex all the time. Ironically, even Wren, the big city boy, is offended by this and becomes the only real voice of maturity in the entire film. In what can only be described as tragic, Wren not only shows his fellow students what adults should act like, he also shows Beaumont's adults what true maturity entails. Maybe we shouldn't be too surprised by this because the film is, after all, co-produced by MTV Films, but the maturity and wisdom on display from Wren is not your typical children know better than parents that is taught by so many modern sitcoms and TV shows, but is an actual variety of the type of adult wisdom and discernment that the Bible commands older people to have. The solution proposed by the town's elders, and even the one that they continue to cling to after Wren's logical appeal to the council, is finally shown to be immaturity and what is ultimately turning their children against them. Once a compromise is found and the town's kids are able to look forward in hope to a legitimate event with dancing and loud music, the kids actually begin to exhibit signs of maturity and growth. No longer bent on disobeying at all costs, they now have a common goal to work towards, and the previously lawless kids become obedient and a credit to their own town rather than a blight. This transformation is most noticeable and most dramatic in Reverend Moore's own daughter, Ariel. Footloose seems to understand that the opposite of legalism is lawlessness, which is an equally destructive force. Wren teaches the town that true freedom lies somewhere in between. Law is a necessity, but excessive laws only serve to kill the spirit. This is the ultimate message of Footloose, but it's a shame that we need to experience so much lawlessness as viewers to get to the real message of maturity. I give Footloose 2.5 stars, because quite frankly, that's all it should get. It's nothing new or novel, even though it does make a few slight modifications to the original story. The remake told the same story in much the same way, but I think it deserves a few backpats for its approach of not only showing the town's motivation for the ban, but also not making Wren as much of an arrogant snot as Kevin Bacon was in the 1984 version. For this reason, I give it 2.5 stars and not just 2 or even 1.5. That's all for today. Remember to watch Movieology on the website, movieology.tv, the source for worldview enthusiast news, reviews, and discussion of all things film. You can also follow us on YouTube, iTunes, Facebook, Twitter, and even with our free newsletter. I'm Eric Rauch, filling in for Joseph Darnell. Until next time, thank you for watching Movieology. I'm actually doing what Joe does right now, whether you realize it or not. Hey! I looked under his and no pronunciation. You're on your own, man. You should know who I am. Get your kids out of here. I got a pocket knife in this pocket and an iPhone over here, so... Oh well. I apologize. This is embarrassing. That's as good as you're gonna get from me. What? Easy for you to say. Get that paragraph out of there.